What if everything you've been told about nutrition and the foods you thought were healthy was a lie? What if the exact thing that you were told to eat more of so that you could build muscle, lose fat, and become healthier was actually one of the very things sabotaging your health? And if it was something you knew the real numbers on, it would completely change your views on the foods you thought were good or bad. The evidence shows that red meat could be increasing your risk of cancer by nearly 20%. But to understand why this number is misleading, we first need to understand what actually is cancer and how can the foods we eat trigger it to happen. Your body is made up of trillions of cells. Your skin, your muscle, your organs. But these cells don't last forever and eventually they die. Imagine these Lego bricks are a cell in your body. This cell, it replicates and it splits to make two identical copies of itself. Then it dies. Cells multiplying and dying though is a good thing and your body is designed to do this. The instructions to make these new cells can be found in your DNA. Your DNA is basically the instructions to this Lego set and it tells each cell how it needs to be built and what color the bricks need to be. And every time a cell copies itself, it copies the instructions too. But this is where cancer can start. Sometimes this cell copying, it goes wrong and one brick is the wrong color. Since the instructions are also copied, but this new cell is wrong, every copy after it will have the same mistake. And this new cell with DNA that's now changed, it copies itself. And because the instructions have changed, it doesn't get a signal to stop copying itself. So it keeps copying itself over and over again. These wrong copies pile up. And this pile is what a tumor is. And when it spreads, well, you've got cancer by then. The foods we eat can't directly make changes to the cells in our body, but it can create conditions where change is more likely to happen. All foods contain different chemicals. This contains heme ions, and it's the main reason why red meat is linked to cancer. You'll also find in processed meats things called nitrites and nitrates, which are the preservatives to make it last longer in the supermarket. When your body digests meat, these chemicals, they get broken down and can be toxic to the cells in your gut. And since meat takes more time to digest than other foods, it gives these chemicals more time to affect and change the DNA in these cells. And the more time these chemicals have to affect your cells, the more likely it is for the DNA in these to change. But to understand the risk that these chemicals can carry, we need to look at the studies that tested red meat, because there's a problem with these studies. The gold standard of science is human randomized control trials. Imagine if a teacher wanted to know if students do better on a test if they drink coffee. He would split them randomly into two groups, one who drinks coffee before a test and one who doesn't. Then he would get the results to see if coffee helped or not. Why does randomizing the students matter though? If you don't randomize it and you let students choose what groups they're in, the more organized people might already drink coffee and they might already do better on tests because they're more organized in their life. By splitting them up randomly, it helps make the groups similar so that the only difference between them is the thing that you're testing. This is where the problem is. Cancer takes a lifetime to develop, and to do a proper test, we would have to follow people for their whole life and control exactly what they ate. It is impossible to run a controlled study doing this for decades. People have got lives and they don't want to be a fucking science experiment. So if we can't run what we would say is the gold standard for human trials, what can researchers use to study the effects of red meat then? There's two kinds of studies that can be done: population and cohort. A population study compares two populations of people. For example, Chinese people versus Italian people. And it compares the amount of deaths to the average consumption of red meat. A cohort study, on the other hand, follows the same group of people for 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years, and it looks at the foods that they consumed by getting them to fill out food questionnaires. When you look at the evidence from these studies, it shows that consuming just one extra serving of unprocessed red meat, such as steak or pork, your risk of cancer can increase by 10%. And when you consume only an extra 50 grams of processed meats like ham, bacon, your risk of cancer increases by 18%. The baseline risk of bowel cancer is 8.2%. So eating this much ham could increase your risk of getting bowel cancer to 26%. But this is where the problem lies when talking about the risk of cancers and diseases. When people talk about risks, there's two kinds of risk: relative risk and absolute risk. If you ate 50 grams of processed meat, your risk would go up by 18%. But that doesn't mean you have a 1 in 5 chance of dying. It means your baseline is 18% higher. And because your baseline is 8.2, you would go from 8.2 to 9.3. That is an 18% increase. This is the difference. Relative tells you the increase that can happen, but absolute is the actual risk you have. Influencers, print media, news outlets, they will all use the relative risk though when it comes to talking about food. Whether it's red meat, seed oils, ultra-processed foods, they use the big number because that's what gets the most attention. But they intentionally ignore the bigger problem around people's diet and lifestyle. People eating large amounts of processed meats and ultra-processed foods are likely looking for convenient options from service stations or fast food chains. And the people that seek out these foods, they're less likely to be physically active and more likely to be overweight. The lifestyle habits that are driving them to consume these foods are the bigger problem. It's not just the food choice alone. Having too much body fat, drinking too much alcohol, being physically inactive, these all have significantly bigger effects on cancer risk. And they could even be making this 18% risk larger than it actually is, because it's hard to separate bad lifestyle habits from the negative effects that these meats can have. So where does this leave you? Eating too much unprocessed red meat isn't the main problem. And physically active people with a healthy body weight face a significantly lower risk to developing these kinds of problems in their life. Maintaining a healthy body weight can lower your risk by 30%. Being physically active could lower it by 25%. Consuming more fiber could lower it by 20%. If you combined all of these together, you would basically remove the negative effects that red meat could have. Focus on staying at a healthy body weight by either eating in a calorie deficit or at a calorie maintenance level by consuming whole foods 90% of the time. Focus on training in a gym or doing some kind of physical exercise to build muscle 3 to 5 times a week. Aim to eat 25 to 35 grams of fiber every day from things like fruit or vegetables. When you take foods in isolation, yes, they can increase the risk of cancers or diseases, but we need to look at the whole picture, because lifestyle patterns and habits will have a significantly bigger effect on your overall health. Yes, consuming red meat does increase your risk of cancer, but if you're doing everything else right, it basically zeroes out. Hopefully you learned something from this video, and if you're trying to lose fat or stay at a healthy body weight, YouTube recommends you should maybe watch this video. If not, bye-bye.